So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat window down here in the lower part of your screen. And I will check back every few minutes and see if we have any questions down there. The other thing that I'll mention just real quickly, I plan on doing another one of these webinars probably in about a month, maybe just before the ASTQB conference, which is the last part of March. I think I have a really great topic. I was doing some collecting of some past things that I've written on test automation and came out with 14 things to consider to automate first. So I thought that sounded like kind of an interesting topic that we might want to explore there. But anyway, I really appreciate all of you being here. As I say, I like to hold these webinars to about 30 minutes or so because I know that around the middle of the day you guys are very busy. As I said, we are recording this. I'll have it posted with hopefully no audio problems like we had last time, and things will go very smoothly and all of that. Just one thing that I'll mention real quickly, my only shameless plug is I've got a lot of my e-learning courses on sale right now at mysoftwaretesting.com. So if you're interested in any e-learning, now might be the time to go check that out at mysoftwaretesting.com. So that's the only big plug that I have here. So let's get into the topic. The question itself about how many testers is appropriate per developer or vice versa has been a question that has just come up all the time, year after year. And so but back in probably 2000 or so, I started polling conference audiences about their ratios and things. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background as well as some of the territory around what we're talking about here in benchmarking with ratios. Then I'll show you what I found. Okay, I'm not going to keep you waiting a long time for that. And then we're also going to look at a little bit of comparison to the past to see what we might can learn from that. And then maybe some helpful ways to apply the metric, some ways at least that I have found in my practice that have been good ways to do this, and then some next steps if you want to go further. I said in the description of the webinar that this one particular article has had more hits on it than any other article that I have. And so I thought, yeah, that's telling me something right there, right? Now, just to make sure that I'm not talking to the wind here, if someone could give me a confirmation, yes, Randy, we can hear you just fine out there, it would make me feel good as a tester to know that you're hearing me. So if anyone, okay. Hey, Alex, great. Chris, cool. Thanks, Neil. Okay, that makes me feel a whole lot better, guys. Appreciate it. So this tester to developer ratio, managers especially seem to be hung up on this, but sometimes testers are too, because, you know, we're the ones that have to kind of bear the burden of maybe the misallocation of people. And I remember when I was a test manager just starting out, we were working under a 10-to-1 ratio. There were 3 of us testers and 30 developers, and it was really hard to get anything done. We had to really scope out our work very carefully, and we couldn't test nearly what we wanted to test. The other side of this is that people are always seemingly looking for industry averages, industry norms, and those kinds of things for all kinds of information. Cost of a defect, time it takes to fix defects, all of that. Well, the problem with this is, and I'm sure you're familiar with the notion here, that A lot of people just don't measure things very well. And the real conundrum about that is that if you do measure something very well, then you're kind of an anomaly. And so you may stick out so far from the norm, we may not even want to use those kind of measures and metrics. So as an industry, we don't measure very well around what we do, and especially in testing. So I would suggest that the industry information is rather scarce. Capers-Jones probably has the best grip on it of anyone that I know of. I typically go to him when I have a question. Gartner, Standish, some of those groups have some good information there. But then the other question is, I ask people, well, do you want to be average? We'll get into that. So I've been looking at this metric now since about 1998, and really the thing that I've found since then is that the ratio is only part of the picture. And for those of you who have been to any kind of testing conference or around any gathering where you have two or more testing so-called experts in the room, and they're on a panel and they all agree on something, you know that that must be a consensus thing. And I was in that situation one time at a conference where there were several of us on a panel. I think there's Lee Copeland and Doc Graham and myself, John Hager, a few other people. And we all came to the conclusion in the panel that ratios are informative as far as kind of knowing where your workload is, but they're not a very good staffing kind of measure. They're not a good thing to aim for, to just look at your spreadsheet and say, oh, okay, we've got 30 developers, therefore we need 10 testers or whatever, because Gartner says or whoever says it should be a 3-to-1 ratio. But one of the things as a consultant that I've learned is that every company is different, but at the same time, every company is the same in certain ways. And what I mean by that is, I do a lot of assessment, so I go in and I see a lot of different things, a lot of different industries, but it's amazing how many people struggle with the same things, like maybe inadequate requirements or inadequate numbers of people to do testing or lack of training or those kind of things. Now, of course, some companies excel in certain areas than others. So what I want to try to do here is kind of pick out the nuggets of what we can really kind of apply to our own work. But I can't really go any further without mentioning the problems with benchmarking. And benchmarking used to be a really big deal in the quality movement, and in fact it may still be, depending upon what you do. There's still a lot of people that are interested in knowing, I'll use the infamous best practice word here, but they're interested in knowing how other people do things and things that they can copy and things that are going well for others. And in fact, some people come to conferences just to hear those things and to get other people's practices. Well, the problem with doing this is that, yeah, you can pick up some good ideas, but there's a lot of nuances around what people do. They may have certain levels of sponsorship. They may have certain levels of developer assistance in what they do. So it breaks down to 3 big areas of differences. We have different people. They have different skill levels, experience, and attitudes. People have different processes. Some people have very ad hoc and not defined processes. Other people have very regimented processes that they have to follow. Some people have great tools. Others really struggle with tools. Some people are great at using them. Some people aren't. Some people say, what's a tool? So, it's almost like looking at your neighbors and saying, oh, they have 5 kids. Well, we need 5 kids too at our house. And it's kind of that kind of logic, and you can see that it just doesn't really hold up. Now, in the past, there have been various companies, various software companies that have touted ratios of like one tester to each developer, and others have gone just the opposite, one tester per 10 developers. Now, so what does that mean besides that we're all over the place? Well, to me it means that just because one company has a certain ratio doesn't mean that should be your ratio. So to me, I look at kind of the maturity of someone's ability to deal with metrics and measurement, in that they can look at a set of measures with one eye, and then they can look at reality with the other one, and they can kind of adjust. It's like driving a car. You don't always, you don't just look at your dashboard when you're driving your car. You have to look at the road as well. And sometimes it's possible your dashboard could be incorrect, you know. You can't totally rely on it either. So the journey is more than just keeping an eye on the numbers. And so that's what I think it helps to do in measurements of any type, and that's kind of the territory we find ourselves in. Now, before I go into this most recent survey and show you what I found here, see if I have any questions. Nope, we're looking good there. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in, because I am, as you see, going back and checking them out. Oops, see a typo. Agile presentations. How you like that? So in this most recent survey, I didn't get the number of respondents that I really hoped to get, so I'm leaving the survey open. As I'll give you the link here again if anyone else wants to participate. It was really pretty thin, and I would like to be able to give a wider range, but I'll also show you some past surveys, which will, I think, give us some also good context. So we had 17 respondents, mainly from the USA, UK, India, and Australia. And what I found in that was that there were 11 of those respondents that had a ratio of one tester to 3 developers. And to me, that was probably the most significant spike I've ever seen in doing this survey. The lowest was 1 to 2. And then we had a couple at 1 to 5, and a couple at 1 to 7, and one at 1 to 8. Now, I asked some secondary questions about this, though, because it's not just about the ratio that we're dealing with here, even though that is important. But I also asked the question, how do you feel that ratio is working for you on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is poor and 5 is great? Now, the person at the 1 to 2 ratio said they thought it worked about average for them. They were getting about average results, effectiveness out of their testing. Interestingly, to me, the 1 to 3 ratio group, they indicated kind of this range from below expectations. There are 3 of them that actually said their tests were performing below efficiency expectations. 1 said about average, but 7 said above, which I thought was some helpful, interesting feedback there. On the 1 to 5 ratios, we had one person that said it was below expectations, and 1 said it was above. And then the 1 to 7, 1 was below, 1 was at average. And at 1 to 8, it was below expectations. Now, the observant among you will notice that no one answered 5. Great. That they really felt like they were getting great results out of the test process that they were using at any ratio. And I thought that was kind of interesting myself, because sometimes somewhere someone's going to say, "Oh yeah, we're doing great." So I don't know what quite to make of that. But let me go through the other couple of questions, and then I'll go back and check the chat window to see if we have any questions chimed in. I also asked the question in the survey, if you could make a change in terms of staffing ratios, what would you desire? 9 said more efficient processes as opposed to more testers. 7 said they needed more testers. 1 person indicated they were fine as is, no change was needed. The other question I asked, does your management consider the ratio between testers and developers when hiring testers? And it was about evenly split there. 9 said no, 8 said yes. And I said, is this something that you discuss very much in your test teams? And it was about evenly split there. 8 said yes, 9 said no. Now, I will bring out some interesting quotes before I go back and check for questions. One person said that in their organization, that developers must play a role in testing, crafting tests, etc., post-code writing, as well as pre and during testing. So the ratios 2 to 15 don't really tell the story. And you know what? I think that's a great point, because anytime you're at one of these wide ratios, you know, like let's say 1 to 10, really the way you get leverage on it is to have developers carry more of, especially the structural testing load. And you're right. If the developers are doing a significant amount of testing, the entire ratio issue kind of goes away in some respects, because it's not just a workload balancing problem there. It says we only have 3 full-time testers, but if you'd have said FTEs, full-time equivalents, it would probably have been more like 5. So they just wanted to make sure we understood that in their numbers. Another comment was, it's very hard to be the only tester for a team of 7 developers. I would agree with that. I need and can't get additional training, better tools, and more testers. Sadly, the company seems satisfied with the release of many bugs, as well as critical bugs to customers of the software, because they are aware of the lack of the things listed above. Seems testing is not just important enough. They keep hiring more and more developers, but expecting different results. I don't know, that sounds maybe like a potential client for me, but it's not an uncommon thing, okay? And it's sad, because a blog post that is stacking up in my head right now to write is about, once upon a time, testing was an assumed thing. Companies knew they needed to do good testing. Quality was an assumed thing. Today, in a lot of companies, it's turned into a concept sale again. If you talk to a salesperson, they'll tell you the difference between a concept sale and another kind of sale, just a regular sale. But the concept sale is you've got to build the understanding and the awareness first before you can go in after that. Another couple of quotes. The tools and quality of the first draft developer work have a lot to do with the ratio's validity, and I would agree. This team has a lot of low-bug developers and highly trained testers, but not a lot of tools and resources to make testing more efficient. It's also difficult to communicate the results clearly to the business, but that's not a ratio issue. Yeah, so if you have fewer defects flowing through the testing process, or at least between developers and testers, that's going to give your ratio a totally different feel. A big issue is the complexity of software to test and technical debt incurred as projects develop. For example, changes in one part of the screen or program breaking other unexpected areas. Yeah, the more complexity you have, and the more those stacked up bug fixes that you have, it's another mountain to work through. And if you're going to make progress catching up on things, then you're going to have to get a grip on really what the proper workload should be. And then finally, this one person said they use continuous integration, Selenium for front-end automation, TestNG for back-end automation, and JMeter for web services automation. Developers are equally responsible for writing automation test cases, which are reviewed and owned by automation testers. One tester is usually sufficient to maintain smoke, regression, and functional test cases by 3 developers. And I thought that was an interesting comment there, too. It looks like they have a good handle on the usage of tools as well as process. Okay, here's some comments here. Violet, hey Violet, how you doing? Microsoft does not now have as many testers as it had when I worked in the 80s. Back then it was 1 tester for 2 developers, but I was also a developer. So, and then now Microsoft doesn't even have the processes for testing that they follow. Yeah, Microsoft is an interesting story for sure. At one time, Bill Gates was touting that they had 1 tester for every developer. When I went out there, they were pressing into service, people like receptionists and all kinds of people to be testers. And I'm not sure if they were counting beta testers in that batch either. But at the same time, they were, they were still finding tens of thousands of bugs, not fixing them all. And then they went into the SDET direction, software developer and test, which to me is a little problematic, okay, because in the SDET view, even though you have a lot of good technical value there, so if you're on the webinar listening to this and you're an SDET, I'm not trying to talk down your job or anything, but I'm just saying that the SDET is going to make some assumptions that probably the more end-user view of tester will not make. And therefore, you wind up testing the application as a developer would test. And Microsoft totally took that direction with Vista. And it's getting the user perspective back, I think. Here's a comment from, let me go back here just a second, from Kotla Reddy. Was developer and tester ratio must be the same? I'm not sure if that's a question or not. I just think it has to be balanced. I think you're probably always going to wind up with more developers than testers, with one exception, and that is if you test COTS products. If you test commercial off the shelf, you may actually wind up with more testers than the developers had building it, but that's a different story. Alex says that Microsoft depends on Marketplace to debug their software products. I would agree with you, Alex, at least to identify where the bugs are. I'm not so sure they actually remove some of those bugs to actually fully debug them, but they are the masters at beta testing because they actually get you to pay them to do the beta test. And so both Google and Microsoft have started this interesting thing, and I'm sure there's others now that are doing it too, that they just flop the product out and they just call it beta. Okay, you know you got it beta, but they're selling it. Or giving it away or whatever, but it is out there for people to use. And they just proudly stamp beta on it, and I don't know what they do with all the data that they get from all the bugs that they find. But yeah, it's that they can turn their entire customer force into a testing force. Violet says when they had the admins testing, that was for usability. Yeah, that makes sense. And Violet agrees with you, Alex. That's why you never buy version 1.0. Exactly. And people say, well, Randy, why haven't you upgraded to the newest OS on the Mac? Well, same reason. I always give it a chance to shake out. Those 1.0 versions, or even worse, .8 or .9, 0.8 or .9 are pretty bad. Violet asks, are you including test automation engineers in the testing paradigm? Because that is not always the situation. Not for my healthcare and previous healthcare insurance clients. They're the automation engineers while they do some testing as they automate the test cases. They are not part of the official test execution team. Is that your experience? It's a mixed bag in my experience, Violet. Sometimes when it comes to the test to developer ratio, the test automators are kind of in a bucket or room over there to themselves, maybe not included in that. Sometimes they are. And I didn't make the distinction in my survey, but that's a good point, and I think I will enhance the survey to make the distinction. How many are testers, purely manual testers? How many are in the role of test automation engineers? That's a very good observation. Milena from Miami says, I think test cases are key if you have a high dev to tester ratio, but it's very difficult to write so many and good test cases when there is only one tester. For me, it would be nice to have one tester testing for me plus the developers testing for me. Using both test cases, I would have plenty of time to write. Yep, and some of the things you might want to consider there, you can do things like pairwise testing and really get efficient in your test cases. And that's where the test case efficiency really comes into play. If I can get by with 1,000 test cases that give me as much value as 10,000 test cases, then that's a big win. And then if I can automate them on top of that, then of course that's the nirvana level, right? That's where everybody wants to be. So yeah, I would agree. And it brings out the point there that testing is not just testing. It's not just banging on keys. It's also test design, it's test evaluation, it's test measurement. And so when you're the only tester doing everything, then you do feel overwhelmed. When you're doing all the reporting and all the test design and everything, it's an army of one. And I know I have several friends that are in that very, very same situation. Violet says the 1.0 version is ditto for buying new car types, brand new types. And I would certainly agree with that one. Don't buy the first release of anything. And then, Milena, automation is not as important, in my opinion, as test cases are. You can automate a really bad test case, and it doesn't do you any good. So test cases, the quality of the test cases do take priority, but if you can get those mundane ones automated, then it frees you up for the manual ones, that you can be more creative. And Violet also agrees with Milena that test cases and the requirement tech specs are more important than automation. And requirement, man, you guys are just going crazy over here. Requirements in an agile environment are not as detailed as at least as they used to be in my company. Yeah, that's one of the things that goes out with agile many times is the level of detail in the requirements. And then Violet says orthogonal arrays and pairwise is beneficial if you have someone who understands that, and probably as well. That's why it's important not just to throw bodies at testing, but hired, trained techies, math majors and people like that. Yeah, that was the good old days of coding. We used to get people from all disciplines. And I totally agree. Only use orthogonal and pairwise if you know what you're doing with it. You can actually do sometimes more harm than good on that. By the way, we have training on that at Rice Consulting if you look for that. In automation, this is Katla from India. In automation, we find more developers or in manual testing. Well, I tell you one thing, manual testers often have difficulty creating automation. Most of the times you'll find developers who have kind of migrated into that role. I don't want to say that exclusively, but that's often what I see. And then Violet says, actually, my teams don't automate until after the first version is released. Then what they are automating are really regression testing. Or what they are automating, I mean. Yeah, we had a debate one time on a project, when should you start automation? Forgive me for taking this little branch here, but I promise I'll get back to the slide deck here in just a second. We had a debate. I would consider 6 hardcore test automation, if not experts, people who just have done this for 20 years, and some of them had, some of us had actually written books on the topic and stuff, and so we got in this debate on when should you start creating automation. During the project, as you're still writing software, because there could be some value, in later stages of testing, or after the software has been released, because now you know exactly what you're automating. And the result of the debate was we came down evenly. 3 of us felt that you should wait until the thing was built and use automation for regression testing, and 3 felt like you should start earlier. But boy, I tell you, there is such a risk there of so many things that can change. So you want to be really careful, because it would be really easy to render all of your automation almost worthless. Okay, hey, great comments. I'm going to go back to the slides for just a minute here. Now, to kind of go back where we've been in the past on this metric, I took a survey back in 2009. I had 72 respondents on that one. 6 were from Europe, 1 from Asia, and the rest from U.S. and Canada. Lots of industries represented. I asked about the same questions that I asked in this one. The leanest ratio that I had was 1 tester to 21 developers. And interestingly, they gave themselves a rating of 5. Now, the richest ratio was 18 testers to 15 developers, almost virtually a 1-to-1. They gave themselves an effectiveness rating of 4. And there were a few anomalies, like 0 testers to 4 developers. I'm not really sure what that was still about. And 1 tester to 0 developers. Maybe they were doing COTS or something. They gave themselves an effectiveness of 6. Maybe that was just someone messing with my survey or something. I don't know. But the average ratio at that time, now keep in mind this was 2009, was 1 tester to 4.81 developers, roughly 1-to-5. The most common response was 1 tester to 3 developers, and that's still what we hear today most commonly, and what our survey that I've just done showed. The next most common was 1-to-5. I had 7 responses with that one. Now, it was kind of interesting. There were 35 responses. Just about half of the responses were tester to developer ratios of 1-to-3 or lower. So if you kind of put that distribution here in a chart like this, they were like, most of them were down in this area. The blue is, by the way, the numbers, and the purple is the effectiveness. So the average effectiveness up here was a 3.04. The average effectiveness at the lower levels was 3.69. So the lower ratios, at least for this little survey, seemed to come up with the higher ratings of their own effectiveness. I thought that was kind of an interesting finding. Now, if you really want to go back in time, back to like 2000, look at what sticks out here. 1-to-3 was really big. 1-to-5 was my mean, and 1-to-6 was the median. And so we had quite a bit of activity here in these 3 especially, or 4, 1-to-2 to 1-to-5. Well, in fact, there's that 1-to-1 stuck in there too, but I kind of took away that 1-to-3 is still a really popular ratio. Now, The thing about all of my surveys that I've ever done on this is that the responses have been off the board. I mean, they have been everywhere. Although in the last survey we saw a very strong spike there in 1 to 3. So if you're looking for an industry norm, just realize that there's a lot of people using a lot of different ratios that are there. And another thing is that there's more to it than the ratio, as we've just been saying, with the practices, the tools, leveraging developer-based testing is a big thing that happens. And those richer ratios, the lower ratios, tends to have the higher performance, at least on the ones that I've seen in my surveys. There were some ratios at the higher levels that had some higher effectiveness ratings, and I have done some qualitative research with some of those higher ratio companies that just swear by what they're doing at 1 to 10 is great. And, you know, I take it at their word. If they say, you know, it's working well for them, that's great. But they're also leveraging tools and some of the other things that were mentioned in some of those quotes as well. But here's what we can take from this. These ratios may be more of a metric to help us understand and adjust our workload than it is to initially determine staffing levels. So, you know, like if you go into a company and you look around and you see that they only have one tester and they have 5 developers, and the tester doesn't even have time to develop the test cases, much less perform them, yeah, you know that there's a deeper problem than the ratio. So, but if you can also understand that, oh, they're at a 1 to 3 ratio, and you know they're getting the basic work done, but they're not quite as effective as they could be. You can look at the techniques and the tools, and you may have to go to a different ratio. But it's not the ratio that's driving the equation. So here are a few questions, kind of like a little checklist that you can go through to kind of give you some context around the ratio issue. Are you using any test tools? And if so, how effective are they? How much responsibility do developers have in the process? Is your testing based on risk? You know, in other words, are you trying to test everything, or do you segment some things out? Are test optimization techniques used in test design? In other words, do you try to do those things like pairwise or cause-effect graphing or any of those kind of things to reduce the number of your tests? What is your defect detection percentage? In other words, what's the percentage of defects you find as a percentage of all the defects compared to how many other people find, including your customers? Are defect trends tracked and studied? You know, once you do find these issues, do you do anything with that information to improve anything? Have the developers and testers been trained in software testing? I mean, hey, you can have a great-looking developer with people, a great-looking a ratio of testers to developers with people who don't know what they're doing in testing, and yeah, you can have some poor results. Is there a defined testing process in place and being used? Now, this doesn't mean it has to be a heavy process, but do people generally know what to do in certain situations? And finally, is root cause analysis used to learn from defects and improve your development and testing processes? And that's another key thing, too. You know, it's kind of interesting that people will complain about being at a certain ratio, let's say 1 to 5, and yet you go in and start looking at it, and they're testing and fixing the same thing project after project. You know, they're not closing that feedback loop. So one of the best things you can do is just, you know, try to get a grip on not making the same mistakes over and over again. That, you know, that gives you some grip on the problem. So all of this kind of helps us understand a little bit about the balance that you need between the process and the people. And before making your sizing decisions, just on numbers of people alone, it may be better to kind of use that developer-tester ratio as a metric to then adjust the process. Like I say, it's kind of like driving. You have one eye on the numbers on the dashboard, but your other eye is on the road, maybe both eyes on the road. But you don't just work from the numbers alone. You use them as a guide, use them as an adjustment more than anything else. Now, if you're in a high situation, a high ratio situation, think about doing what some of our commenters said, was having the developers have more of a load in testing, more of a responsibility there. And also, getting your process down, working on the effectiveness of the process. Do risk-based testing where it makes sense and automation where it makes sense. And then one of the best things I ever did, it was, at the time I did it at least, it was fairly low cost but high return, was to build this really good repeatable set of test data for regression testing. So I didn't have to build the data every single time I did a test. And of course, optimize your test. That kind of goes back to the efficiency points of testing. Now, for the next steps on this, I plan to continue doing this research. So if you have some feedback for me, just send me an email. I hold it in strict confidence. I don't associate companies or anything. I'm also going to leave the survey open for a while longer at my blog, randallrice.blogspot.com, and the exact link is right here. But if you just go to my blog, you'll find it there. And so, in summary, you'll see that this ratio varies a lot from company to company. And average may not be good for you. You may want to be different than average. And it's probably better to use as guiding your process than staffing your team. And keep in mind that there are people that have extremely good experiences with high ratios if they have the right mix of tools and processes and people going on there. Now, I have these two articles out there on my website if you're wanting to see these. And by the way, the slides will be posted here shortly out to my blog and out to SlideShare, as well as the recording of the session today will also be out there, and I'll put it up on YouTube as well. So you'll have access to that. There's how to reach me if you want to send me lots of business and money. Thank you all a lot for showing up. I'm going to check for comments one more time if you'll permit me. Let me just check to see here. Oh boy, a lot of stuff going on. Let me see if I can extract anything that I need to really mention. A lot of things, a lot of comments, it looks like, around turning manual testers into automation engineers. That's a good point. It looks like that Violet and Carla are going to connect on Facebook, which is awesome. By the way, feel free to come by my Facebook page and connect as well. So anyway, it looks like some good comments out here. I think you guys probably saw all of those. So I'm not going to go back and reread those. It's at 45 minutes past the hour right now. I appreciate you all being here today. I hope you found some helpful information in this. Once again, feel free to contribute to the survey as I keep it up. And once again, I think the next topic will be how to know what to automate first. And I'll probably be doing that in about a month or so, just before the ASTQB conference, but I'll be sending out a notice on that. And e-learning on sale, mysoftwaretesting.com. Okay? Hey, thanks a lot, everybody, for being here. I look forward to seeing you next month. Oh, thank you, Violet. You said that was a good use of my time. That's a great compliment coming from you. Thanks for all of you that are saying thank you. So thanks, Alex and Milena. Appreciate all you guys being here. We will see you later, okay?